with his fellows, of course, running late to a meeting, and he's to park in Manhattan. Anybody who knows you need to park in Manhattan, that's basically an impossible. So he's trying desperately to find a parking spot, and he says, God, if you give me a parking spot, I'll be nice to people today. Nothing. Now it drives another 2 blocks. God, I'll give 10% of what I earned today from this business meeting. I'll give it to tzedakah. Still nothing. God, okay, that's it. I'll keep Shabbos. I'll keep kosher. I'll start going to minyan at least once a day. And and basically, as soon as he says that, he mentions Shabbos, kosher, and going to shul. Suddenly, a car pulls out, and he says, "Oh God, forget about it. I was able to take care of it myself." So obviously, that relationship with us and God can quite easily turn into a silly one if we're not willing to pay attention. It has to be a constant. And we've been speaking about this idea that you have a constant flame within ourselves, and that's basically this idea of the sanctuary within ourselves, that we are sacrificing our animal soul to God, so to speak. We're bringing it close to God, and we're going to talk about that more in detail right now. And this is the idea of self-refinement, this idea of finding and revealing God within ourselves, which is very much part of this process of Ve'asuli mikdash v'shachanti bitocham, that you will make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell within them, within every single Jew. When we have the sanctuary within ourselves, we don't have this kind of struggle. We don't have this kind of issue of, okay, God, give me, candy, so to speak. Give me the external things of life, and we realize that everything is a godly experience. Amen. So now we're going to go a little bit more into this idea. We're up to about halfway down the chapter, to a paragraph that begins, just as a physical offering was consumed by the divine fire on the altar, similarly, in the physical sphere, the personal sphere, the offering which is each individual's animal soul, has to be consumed by his divine fire. And this way, the animal soul will be taught to develop a love for God. This is a crucial sentence. And it's a sentence which really, really defines so much of what life is all about, and really defines so much of the Chabad and general Hasidic approach. And I say general Hasidic approach because this is what is meant to be done and people don't realize it. And I mean this both in terms of the way that even Chabad Hasidim forget about this idea. So it's not a criticism, God forbid, of other people. It's a fact that people forget about this concept. That our animal soul is not simply a distraction from godliness. It's meant to be a vehicle. So in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe points out that the godly soul is based primarily in the mind. The animal soul is based primarily in the heart. And the idea is that basically, logically, you understand that you should behave a certain way, you should do certain things. And when we apply logic to our lives, we realize that this is what needs to be done, and therefore we do it. The emotion, on the other hand, wants certain things and is excited by certain things. And so therefore, the animalistic tendencies are based in the heart because of the fact that that's what excites a person. A person is typically driven after things that they're excited by. You have to be more intellectually and emotionally mature in order to be able to be driven by something intellectual. And so therefore, the idea here is that it's not enough to have an intellectual relationship with God. The idea is that the godly soul needs to use the passion and excitement and drive that is found in the heart, that is found in the animal soul, because it does not have it naturally, so to speak. It needs this vehicle in order to be able to be driven towards godliness. The godly soul by itself is godly. But it recognizes that it can accomplish so much more through using the body as a vehicle. So it's not about abandoning, and this has been really, if you look at the theme of several of the Maimarim that we've spoken about, it's not about abandoning physicality. It's about using it in a particular way. It's about manipulating it so that it is used and it is driven towards godliness as opposed to distracting us. So the animal soul needs to be taught to develop a love for God. And that's done when a person creates within themselves a recognition of the goodness of godliness. The pasuk says, "Tamu uru ki tov Hashem." Taste it, and you will see that God is good. And that the animal soul needs to get a taste, and it needs to get a actually feeling that tastes good. And they need to recognize, the animal soul needs to recognize that Shabbos is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And that keeping kosher is absolutely fantastic. That all of the rest of the elements of Judaism, no matter what it is, taste it and you'll see that God is good. The animal soul needs to be taught that it's not trying to be broken, but that it's good for the animal soul too, to have some kind of drive, to have some kind of purpose. We are not meant to be split into our spiritual and our physical worlds. We are meant to drive them together. And the only way to be able to do that is to communicate with the animal soul in the language that it understands. It understands what feels good. And so therefore we need to teach it that Judaism and that godliness feels good. It's a critical idea. And so the Rebbe continues and says, this is hinted to in the wording of the phrase from Shema, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. And the word for heart is not libecha, but livavecha. And the doubling of the middle word suggests a plural form, and is thus interpreted by the Talmud to mean that a man is commanded to love God with the whole of your dual heart, with both of your hearts, bishnei tzarecha, with both of your inclinations, with both of your desires, so that the animal too will love divinity. The advice is given to people who are meditating on Judaism, on godliness before prayer, that you need to meditate about things that your animal soul can appreciate. And if you meditate purely on spiritual ideas, so you might be intellectually fascinated, but it won't impact your animal soul. But if you meditate, on the other hand, on things that your animal soul, that yourself, that your tendencies appreciate, then it can bring you to a place where you can actually appreciate godliness. And so that means, whether it means, meditating about the beauty of the world and how the systems all work perfectly together, whether that means meditating about the things that we've received in our lives and how it all comes from God, whether that means trying to perceive God's unity within our lives. But again, it needs to be not something distant, not something disconnected, but very much personal. That's the point. So this comes about through the enclothement of the divine soul within the animal soul. For initially, the animal soul has no knowledge of divinity nor any sensitivity for it whatsoever. Nevertheless, when the godly soul, which is enclosed in it, meditates on spiritual concepts in a manner in which the animal soul can also comprehend, the animal soul also draws near to them. As explained elsewhere, a pervasive impression is thereby made upon that divinity is comprehensible. This continues to the point that the animal soul is transformed from its bestiality. It is elevated and consumed by the fiery coals of the divine soul's yearning for God, just as an animal offered on the Beit HaMikdash was concerned by the fire of the altar. And this is the sublimation spoken of in the verse, there are many harvests in the strength of an ox. In other words, a man can harness the power of his animal soul to the service of God. Whether this is a joke or not, I don't know. I'm going to assume that it's a joke. But in the beginning of the Hasidic movement, we're talking about in the 1700s, 1800s, there were certain people who called themselves Prushim. Parush means to separate. And these people used to separate themselves from everything, and they would do all sorts of things. You had people who stuffed up their ears. You have people that put like blinders from, horses on their eyes so that they shouldn't see anything. And they sat in the corner of the shul and they learned all day, and they never didn't speak anything. They were basically hermits. And this was like a style of certain types of Jews. And in the Hasidic movement, this was basically considered a total and absolute joke, because it's not considered to be normal. It's not considered to be part of Judaism to run away from life. We're supposed to get married. We're supposed to have children. We're supposed to deal with the real world. The ultimate of Judaism is to be able to apply Judaism into the world, not to run away from it. The vast majority of Torah deals with the struggles of life, how to apply God's will into farming, into business, into family life. So to run away is no special deal. And I know that nowadays there are some Haredim who do this kind of thing as well, but basically this is not the ideal. Sometimes there's supposed to be a couple people who are focused their lives on that kind of thing. Whatever, that's not for now. But the point of the matter is that these people did this kind of thing, and the Hasidim considered this to be an absolute joke. So in some synagogue, a couple of jokers basically went upstairs to the women's section and called down in a very spooky voice, to this parish, to this hermit, "Yankel, Yankel, your time has come." And this guy looks up. Who is the voice coming from? He can't see anything. "Yankel, Yankel, you are such a holy person that we've decided to give you your heavenly rewards in this physical world." And so now Yankel's all excited about this. And the voice continues and says, "Continue, go into the next room, and you will receive your spiritual world, your Gan Eden, your Garden of Eden in this world." And goes into the next room, and there is a table stocked with alcohol. And so he starts drinking. This is God's giving him his his just rewards. And he gets himself completely drunk. He's obviously part of his job as somebody who's completely drunk, especially somebody who's not been drinking for quite a while. He starts, shall we say, regurgitating upon himself. At this point, the people who had played this prank on him think that they've gone far enough, and they basically start dragging him out to try to help him clean himself off and maybe try to sober him up a little bit. And he screams at them, "Leave me alone. I'm in Gan Eden." So as he's throwing up on himself, as he's vomiting on himself, he's stuck in this image that he has created for himself, that I am now in the Garden of Eden. So like I said, I don't know if this was a joke that was made to make fun of these people, or if this was something that actually happened. It certainly could have actually happened, because there were played on Chassidim and not. But the fact of the matter is that in our own worlds, we oftentimes get stuck in that, where we don't realize what is spirituality, and we can convince ourselves of something that is when it's not. And we can also convince ourselves that there are two different worlds. There's a spiritual world, and there's a physical world. And the idea here is, no, they're absolutely aligned. They're absolutely part of the same thing. And the animal soul needs to be taught to be able to absorb godliness, to recognize that godliness is not against its existence. It brings it to a greater existence. And that process causes a refinement of self. This Parush, or anybody like him, with all of his studying, could not refine himself. And the proof is, as soon as he's faced with something that seems exciting, in this case it was alcohol, he's imbibing, and he doesn't realize that there's something beyond his own world. He doesn't realize that what he's trying to do is for self-gratification. So in his case, his animal soul is completely focused on Torah, not for the purpose of connecting to God, but for the purpose of trying to look like a holy person and to be able to pretend that he's a holy person. And likewise, there's a story that's told by the previous rabbi in is a classic book called Lubavitcher Rebbe's Memoirs. Been translated into English. It's absolutely fascinating. A picture of what Judaism looked like as the Alter Rebbe's father was trying to figure out who he was and was exploring different routes to Judaism, till eventually came to the way of the Baal Shem Tov. And the Prushim are found in that book, and one of the Prushim in that book, this kind of style was found in that book, and in one of these cases, the Hasidim played a prank on the rabbi in Simchas Torah, where they made an announcement on Simchas Torah. On Simchas Torah, they asked everybody to come to come up. They call people up to read a pasuk from Atzah Resa, and so oftentimes they'll say, will all the Kohanim read this particular verse? Will all the Leviim read this particular verse? And so one of the Hasidim came over to the Gabbai and said, to make an announcement that the most humble people in the shul should read this particular verse, because this verse expresses humility. And the Gabbai might have had a l'chaim or two, he didn't realize that this was a prank, and makes an announcement for all the anovim in the shul, all of the most humble people in the shul, read the next verse. And immediately the rabbi and immediately the president of the shul walk straight up to the bima with no questions whatsoever, and they immediately proudly say the verse without realizing that the joke is being played on themselves. Because there's no sense of refinement. There's no sense of sublimating, as the word he uses here, of nullifying the self and connecting the self to something greater than us. So the animal soul is driven towards something, but the animal soul is driven towards something that is, shall we say, far spirituality. Even though it is mixed up with Judaism, but it is not true because of the fact that the self is so invested only in oneself, as opposed to invested in godliness. So the study of Torah is for what? If the study of Torah is for the purpose of getting closer to God, that's the ultimate. But if the study of Torah is for one's own honor, for one's own position, for one's anything that is self-driven, that's the animal soul getting taken over by by, kind of the animal soul is directing the show instead of being directed. The offering of physical sacrifice caused the godly sparks invested within the mineral, vegetable, and animal components of the world to be refined and elevated. And similarly, the offering of a spiritual sacrifice within oneself refines and elevates the animal soul and transforms its darkness into light. In this manner, they shall make me a sanctuary, and I shall dwell within them, within each individual. And this is accomplished through the divine service of subordinating his animal nature, particularly in a manner that leads to its transformation. For then, as the Zohar states, when the Sitrach is subdued, the glory of God rises thereby and is diffused throughout all the worlds. This refers to the revelation of the transcendent light, which is called Sovev Kolam. So I saw a sikha where the Rebbe explains that there are 3 stages to this transformation. And this is a very, very, very important idea. The first stage is to speak to the animal soul. When children are growing up, the first stage of education is, of course, the upshernish, when you cut the child's hair, and even before that, but at this particular stage, the upshernish includes, among other things, you give the child candy, and you tell them that Torah is sweet. You tell them, I'm going to give you prizes for doing the right thing. And this has been the way Judaism has always been. As a child, you get rewarded for doing the right thing. And this goes back into the Talmud itself. This is absolutely part of Jewish education, is to bribe children, to give them the sense that Judaism is good. And even as the child grows up, like goes into adulthood, there's still an element of this. If I do Judaism, there's good. I get goodness along with it. And of course, as an adult or as a teenager, at whatever level you're talking about, at that point, there are higher levels. It's no longer candy. And now it's things that are more applicable to an adult, somebody that's more mature. I talk about purpose. You talk about greater growth or anything else that are rewards, so to speak. But very, very much there's still an element of doing it for some kind of results. The second stage, though, is important because the first stage is working with your tendencies so that your tendencies don't rebel against Judaism. And you're working with your personality. You're working with the expectation to get something out of it. The second stage, in order to be able to make sure that your relationship with Hashem and your avodah, your service of God, is not limited to doing it for self desires, ultimately, a person needs to go beyond that, and at some point always to push themselves past that. And there's a certain element of breaking oneself, doing something that's against your nature in order to be able to grow. And every single person has that in their own way. To do it because it needs to be done, to do it because it is correct. And again, as a child gets older, at a certain point, they don't get candy anymore. At a certain point, they need to do it because they were told to do it. And within ourselves, again, as adults, sometimes we do it, we don't enjoy doing it. There are elements of Judaism that are not fulfilling and do not give us exactly what we wanted. We don't see any purpose in this whole thing. And there's always a mitzvah that is much more difficult than others for every single one of us. And there's always ways of performing mitzvot in such a way that we don't necessarily identify with. Me personally, my style, what I enjoy is flexibility. I enjoy relating to other people. I enjoy seeing color in the world. I look at the world in a very, very, broader manner, and I see that people can serve God in all different ways. And that's very much part of the chesed approach. Chesed is, of course, kindness, it's giving, it's open, it sees that there are other ways. Gevura means discipline. This is what needs to be done. And this is what needs to be done right now. So somebody who's very, very disciplined is very good about, let's say, time and time-bound mitzvot. Really, really, really good about saying Shema in the proper time, about praying exactly in the proper time, about making sure that they make Kiddush in the proper time, that they anything that has to do with the time-bound mitzvah. A Gvura style person is also very strict about how they deal with certain things, and they have what we call chumrot. They have very specific stringencies and ways of beautifying the mitzvah, which are kind of beyond the pale. Whether it's, somebody like that loves Pesach. Pesach is the ultimate of a chumrah holiday because you can't find any crumbs of chametz in one's house, and so therefore these people, they blowtorch the entire house, burn the house down, and burn and build another one every single year in order to be able to celebrate Pesach properly. I don't identify with that. I have a very, very, very hard time with that kind of stringency, that kind of rigidity. But that is part of Judaism. But the flexibility is also part of Judaism. And so my nature is to be more flexible and more open. And I need to integrate the elements of discipline and focus and structure and rigidity into my service of God. Were I to replace my flexibility with rigidity, I would be replacing myself with somebody else. And so that's incorrect. I need to not allow my flexibility to control myself. And I need to serve God in a way that incorporates the other elements into my life. It's difficult. And it's so difficult, you constantly kind of find yourself coming back, because the fact is that my nature is to be flexible. My nature is not to be disciplined. My nature is not to be rigid. I don't like rigidity. But that second stage is meant to be a stage in which these stages constantly work with each other day after day. It's not like you get to a certain point and you're no longer doing these things. It's a concept. This is a lifetime concept. But we need to be able to break the control that our personality has over us in order to be able to accomplish something greater. And that brings us to a third stage. And the third stage is the ultimate of serving God, because at that stage one is making choices. And they're not making choices based on personality. They're not making choices based on whether or not I feel like doing this. And they're not making the choices whether or not, basically, okay, I need to break myself. Those are both limiting factors. But at that third stage of serving God, they're making absolute choices. What does God want from me here, regardless of what I want? That's a point of refinement that I don't only know about conceptually. I cannot tell you what it looks like in person. I've yet to actually experience that, but that's what we're driving towards, as opposed to the other side. The other side is, of course, the animal soul controlling us for our constant efforts to shut the animal soul up or try to get it to leave us, let go of its hold on us through breaking it. So the next chapter, and I'm going to send you, God willing, this coming week, I'm going to send you a PDF of the rest of the mimer, because the next chapter can be summarized a lot faster, and I do want to get to a Purim mimer. But the next chapter is going to talk about the lowest levels of this whole idea. And the fascinating thing is that we're not afraid of those lowest levels, and we actually have to take those elements of the animal soul and use them for Judaism. And here you're going to see where the previous Rebbe takes this idea and applies it very, very, very much into the 20th century and beyond. And this is where, in the next chapter, we're going to, once we start kind of unpackaging it, we'll see how that really, really set the tone for the future of Chabad, and why Chabad was able to be unlike any of the other Hasidic movements in terms of being able to create a worldwide approach. When everybody else was hunkering down and trying to protect themselves, Chabad was like, okay, we're expanding, we're open for business. And so the next two chapters, we're going to really see how the idea is expressed were the ingredients to that process. Any quick questions before we go? All good?
Oh yeah, thank you, Rebbe. Have a great Shabbos.
Yeah, a good Shabbos to everybody.
Good Shabbos, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye, everyone.
We'll see you on Wednesday, Bez Hashem. Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.